Welcome to Government Contracting Weekly, sponsored by AOC Key Solutions Incorporated. Government Contracting Weekly is the only television program devoted exclusively to the competitive and dynamic world of government contracting. A world where coming in second place is not an option, but where principle-centered winning is the only approach.
Good morning and welcome to Government Contracting Weekly. I'm your host, Jim McCarthy. At a very early age, you probably heard the expression, "It's a small world." Well, if it was true when you were a child, it is nothing short of amazing how technology has shrunk our planet into what some folks refer to as a global village. Now, Government Contracting Weekly is all about helping you win contracts. In today's program, we want to shed some light on the steps that foreign companies are taking to enter the U.S. market, as well as what you can be doing to crack the international market. Our program begins with a conversation that I recently had with some experts on two of America's great trading partners, New Zealand and South Korea. First, I'll be joined by Robert Cunningham, Business Development, Government Contracting for the Embassy of New Zealand, and Wanro Lee, the CEO of JG Business Link International from South Korea. After Robert and Wanro, you'll meet Michael Rundy, the president of the World Trade Center Dulles Airport, where you'll learn what is taking place right here in our own backyard. As always, there is a lot to cover, so let's get right to it. Good morning. I'm here today with Robert Cunningham and Wanro Lee. And gentlemen, I welcome you to Government Contracting Weekly. We're glad you're here, and we're going to talk today about international trade and business in the United States and vice versa. My first question, I'm going to toss it over to both of you, and that is ask for our audience, describe a little bit about your background and your affiliation and your what you're doing and how it's relevant to our audience. Okay, so we'll start with you, Wanro. Go ahead.
All right, thank you, Jim. I'm Wanro Lee. I'm the CEO of JG Business Link International, and what my company does is we assist in business consulting and development for Korean companies that want to enter into the U.S. or U.S.-based companies that want to enter into Korea. We are a contractor with the state of Maryland for their foreign office, but as a U.S.-based entity, we also deal with other states as well.
Okay, thank you. Very good. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome very much. Okay, Robert, how about telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm with New Zealand Trade and Enterprise and work in the Washington office for New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, which is New Zealand's international business development agency, and support New Zealand companies entering into the U.S. market and doing business in the government contracting community.
I'm going to just come out with a point-blank question. And the question I'm going to ask you is, why is free trade not working? And Robert, what is your response to that?
That's a good question. I'm thinking about it a little bit. I think actually free trade does work. New Zealand is a free trade economy, and I think the more that you bring down regulatory barriers for trade and investment, economies benefit. So New Zealand actually is in the midst of a trade negotiation involving multiple countries, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So free trade is something to aspire to. There's never pure trade. There'll be regulatory impediments regardless, but I think the ideal is ideal worth pursuing.
Okay, so Wanro, I know you don't speak for the government per se, but from a perspective of your country, do you think that the free trade agreements generally are working between U.S. and its various trading partners?
Yes and no.
Yes and no.
So after it got ratified by both countries last year, I think there were certain hurdles that they need to work through and certain differences that they were trying to basically work out and negotiate still. And as both trading partners are getting used to each other and getting acclimated to each other's business culture and environment and the regulatory procedures, I do agree with Robert that the regulatory piece has been very stringent, and there needs to be some harmonization between both sides. Also, I think the companies on both sides also need more information as regards to what items and how tariffs are being phased out. And I think honoring certain aspects of like the visa issues that the South Korean government is running into on how many visa waivers that they'll be able to receive from the U.S. government, while on the Korea side, for U.S. government companies that are going in, they have less restrictions. So I think there needs to be a balance.
So it's a yes and no, yes. It's plus and minus. There's two sides to the story. Okay. Another direct question. I'll start with you on this. And let me premise it by saying that anybody who reads the papers for the last 6 months has seen the government, U.S. government in turmoil. Sequestration, budget cliffs, continuing resolutions, gridlock, very politicized and all that stuff. It's to the extent that some companies in this country are at least thinking about whether or not they want to get out of the U.S. government market. So the question I would ask, why in the world do you want to be in the U.S. government market?
It's an interesting question. I think as far as Korean companies are concerned, being able to enter into the U.S. is still very much a dream. And there's a lot of opportunities here. And to be able to work with the U.S. government, there's a certain level of prestige that is still incorporated internationally. Even with the current turmoils that have been going on within the U.S. government, I think they have a feeling there's a period of readjustment so that there would be more opportunities, kind of a level playing field, and to be able to acquire those contracts.
Okay. Robert, New Zealand's a beautiful country, but I suspect it's more than just kiwi and sheep.
Yes, much.
There's a technology component that a lot of people don't know about. Can you tell us how that fits into this perspective of why they want to do business in the U.S., given the technology angle?
Yeah, your perception about New Zealand is correct. It has a lot of good points going for it in terms of a destination for tourism. Sheep is often commonly associated with the country, but the untold story really is the technology and the innovation that's coming out of that country that is getting some traction in not just the U.S. market, but in global markets. And we found that the U.S. government is a willing partner in working with our companies in terms of contracting, but also research and development. So it's been very successful, and despite sequestration and the budget cuts, still the budgets are quite large around the world, and it's a market that is of considerable interest to our companies. But they do come to New Zealand Trade and Enterprise to help them navigate the market and to understand, what the budget cliffs are about, what sequestration is. So we spend a good amount of our time explaining some of those issues and then navigating the companies into the proper zone.
One row, I want to ask you the same question I just asked Robert. All this sequestration and shutdown and gridlock, how badly has it damaged the U.S. credibility in foreign markets in general, or South Korea in particular?
Well, in South Korea, they do see certain aspects of the sequestration and the shutdown. As far as the politics and the general Korean government, they're very aware of the history and all the things that are happening. The embassy is very aware. But short term, yes, that there has been some loss in credibility. But as I stated before, it is a period of adjustment. I think that there's still opportunities that are available for these companies within the U.S. market. And as far as the general commercial side, it's still booming. There's still a lot of interest. There's still a lot of market. As far as the government contracting side, that's where things get a little dicey.
Yeah. Well, of course, the U.S. government annually purchases about $500 billion of goods and services from around the world, including internationally and at home. I noticed that South Korea is one of the major trading partners of the United States. And I think the number last year in 2012 was over $101 billion. Given the uncertainties and some of the things we just talked about, what is it about the relationship that allows those kind of numbers to come about? What's causing that? Or why are we so robust in our trade, given some of the problems that we've described here?
Well, I think on the commercial side, as far as the actual U.S. market, Korea as a trading partner, Korea has found a lot of opportunities. We've got name brands that are not only recognized within the U.S. but internationally, and that there's still a lot of trade that's going on in the commercial and the private sector. As far as the public sector, there's still certain opportunities. There's certain regulatory things. There are certain aspects that the Korean government contractors still need to be able to wade through. But those adversities, those obstacles are still able to create and generate new markets and new availability for contracting.
Okay. Well, I'd like to sort of follow up with that question with you, Robert. And New Zealand obviously is a long time and very dear ally to the United States. I believe that the trade back and forth last year was in excess of $10 billion. Your charter, I assume, is as economic development is to grow that number.
Yep.
So how do you plan to grow it? How do you think that you should proceed in that line?
Well, I think one thing we do pretty well is reach out to the companies and let them know of the opportunities and continually refresh them on sort of the market opportunities. Currently in New Zealand, we're doing a program where we'll have probably 50 or 60 companies learning from the experts on sort of where the market opportunities are, and we work very closely to really get that message out. But we also try to encourage companies that are really serious about the market to set up a beachhead in the U.S. market so that they have a sustained presence and can service the contracts that they're winning and develop further relationships in the market.
What kind of companies, New Zealand companies, tend to want to establish a beachhead in the United States? What service or product are they providing?
Well, it's a range. The area that I work in the most is in the technology area. So these are software companies that are in the business of electronic health records. On the security side, access controls and investigative policing software, as well as emergency radio communication. So it really runs the gamut, actually, of software to specialized manufacturing. Some work in the marine and aviation areas happening as well.
And Monroe, what would be your answer from your perspective of what market sectors would be of primary interest to say to a Korean company?
Right now, the biotechnology sector, infrastructure, and telecommunications, those are kind of the key ones. Just recently, we've been talking with Korean pharmaceutical companies in developing their manufacturing here in the U.S. And the reason why we've been doing that is that there's been, with the shutdown, with the sequestration, the regulators being able to enter and get clearances for the manufacturing plants in Korea, there's a backlog for them. And since there's a big boom in as far as generic pharmaceutical availability, drug shortages, the Affordable Health Care Act, those sort of things are kind of the coming together into a perfect storm for these manufacturing companies in Korea who have been doing generics for 70 years to be able to enter into the U.S. market and develop these products and to service the American public.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. I would like to ask you, maybe you could capsulize, if you will, why should our audience care about what we're talking about? Monroe, what's your thought?
I think as far as government contracting internationally, and Robert, I'd be interested in hearing this as well, is that the sophistication, the infrastructure, the management of it, it's starting to become kind of a level playing field. Everyone is very familiar with a lot of the roles and products that are being developed internationally. In Korea, as far as their contracting and development, it's very similar. And as the U.S. being such a strong alliance partner for over 60 years, there's been this development between the two countries that have made it so that both it's cooperative and competitive. And so there is an opportunity for Korean companies to come into the U.S., but I think also for U.S.-based companies to enter into Korea.
Okay, thank you. Robert, what would be one message you'd want to give to the government contracting audience and government officials who are also watching?
Yeah, in terms of government agencies, I think just based upon past experience, New Zealand company offers a lot of innovation and technology and are good research partners. So we've had several companies, for example, do business with DARPA. There's a group called the Foreign Comparative Technology Office where some of our companies have had very proactive engagement. And so another acronym to throw out there is the Technical Support Working Group. So in terms of the government agencies, I think it's really the innovation and the technology that New Zealanders bring to the table that's of interest.
And in terms of government contractors, would it be the same? Is that a fair statement?
Well, yeah, I think, again, I think that government contractors, systems integrators are looking for best overall solutions, and some of our companies have niche solutions that basically help some of the bigger SIs, fill voids in the government contracting process, but also the teaming aspect. I think New Zealand Zealand is very well placed in the Asia Pacific region, and so oftentimes what happens is a conversation will start off with an SI about the U.S. market, and then suddenly reverse over to partnering in the UK, Asia Pacific, Australia. So it's that teaming partnership that has global ramifications.
Robert mentioned teaming relationships and teaming. How do you think that helps companies get into the U.S. market from abroad? Can you describe that to us, your feeling?
Teaming is actually very important, and also not just navigating the U.S. market, but also the regulatory procedures and the U.S. government in general. I think finding a good consultant is a very key step, and to be able to understand both sides, to be able to help in the negotiation and the business development process. Secondly, I think for the Korean companies or the U.S. companies that are looking at both sides as far as contracting is concerned and the availability to be able to find the key industry sectors, whether it's IT, cybersecurity, biotechnology, finding what the niche is, and also being able to incorporate that into their business development plan and be able to execute.
By now, our regular viewers know that there's a common feature that ends all of our programs. We call it Keys to Winning, because that's what this program is about. So the question I have for you is, we're going to look at keys for winning for both foreign companies doing business in the United States and U.S. companies doing business abroad, okay? So in your view, Wonro, what's the key to doing all that? What's the takeaway?
Well, I think for U.S.-based companies that want to enter into the Korean space, there are already less restrictions for them to be able to enter into it. So finding a key Korean partner that has very similar sort of products or services to be able to assist them in that navigation would be a kind of a win-win situation. I think for Korean companies that want to enter into the U.S., that there needs to be some more mentoring, and to be able to not only understand the regulatory aspects, but also be able to navigate those waters. Those are the keys.
So the key there would be the mentoring aspect,
Yes.
helping people sort of guide through the labyrinth of U.S. government regulation.
Absolutely.
Okay. So Robert, how you take a stab at it for us? What's your answer to the question?
Yeah, I guess for New Zealand companies entering the U.S. market, one of our first discussions with companies is to really understand what problems they're seeking to solve, as opposed to having a technology that they're trying to place into the market somehow. So that's a key aspect to success, is understanding what the customer needs and then delivering that and showing how their product, the New Zealand product, has a differentiator that's better, faster, and cheaper than the competition. And getting to the competition, knowing the competition is very important, so do your homework.
Okay. And how about the other way around? How does that work?
Well, in terms of U.S. companies looking to expand in the Asia-Pacific region, we think that the New Zealand economy is a free and open economy that's very much interested in attracting foreign direct investment. In fact, New Zealand Trade Enterprise also is in the business of trying to bring foreign direct investment to New Zealand. And it's a good beachhead for not only business in New Zealand, but also in close-by markets, Australia, Southeast Asia. So the environment's warm, and we really encourage companies to come to New Zealand.
So the key would be sort of teaming, what we've been talking about all show so far.
I think at the end of the day, it's about teaming. 75% of our work actually at the New Zealand Embassy is helping New Zealand companies team with U.S. partners. And sometimes it's the big SIs, but oftentimes when it comes to defense contracting, it's working with veteran-owned firms.
Good morning, my name is Alan Horlick, and I'm the executive producer of Government Contracting Weekly, which is currently in its second year on television. Now, as we move into a new year, I want to share with you some exciting news, and that is our decision to begin producing and airing commercial messages. This unique program attracts a pure concentration of both industry and government decision makers. As an advertiser, you can't afford to waste your money. So whether you are a contractor or a service provider, Government Contracting Weekly offers you the perfect environment and the perfect audience so you can make your own best pitch on why you should be hired. If you'd like to learn more about advertising in Government Contracting Weekly, you can contact us at governmentcontractingweekly.com and click on Advertise.
Now that you've gained some international perspective from Robert Cunningham and Wanro Lee, let's turn to Michael Rundy, the president of the World Trade Center Dulles Airport. Good morning. With me now is Michael Rundy, who is president of the World Trade Center Dulles, which is a member of the World Trade Centers Association worldwide that consists of 300 World Trade Centers representing 750,000 businesses in over 75 countries. Michael, welcome. What is the World Trade Center Dulles? Tell us about that.
Well, as you said, we are a licensee of the World Trade Centers Association headquartered in New York, and every licensee is to become a microcosm of their economic area and provide international trade services and consulting, both inbound and outbound.
Okay, well, so how did you get involved in all this? What brought you to the point where you were interested in government contracting in the U.S. market and everything else?
Yes, over the past couple of years, I've been approached by a couple executives from trade centers overseas in Asia, Latin America, whose countries had signed a free trade agreement or the international procurement agreement with the U.S. government, authorizing their companies to sell directly to the U.S. government. And they were challenged with how to begin, what should they tell their companies, how should they set the stage. So they asked me to help them along, and that's what I've been involved with the last few years.
Then, huh?
Yeah.
Well, okay, if I asked you what your vision is for the World Trade Center Dulles, could you describe that? How's this all going to play out?
Well, we are the first World Trade Center to be admitted to the International Association of Science Parks and Innovation Regions, and it's headquartered in Europe, and that's another 300 technology parks. Because of that relationship, it formed our focus to focus on technology transfer, technology commercialization, putting together joint ventures in the technology area, and that led us to this type of approach.
So for our audience, it's obvious that there's a market here maybe for foreign businesses to come to the United States. What about contractors that are here? How does this all pertain to the current contractor force here?
Well, there's been many studies done that show that there is much innovation going on overseas that is not going on here, and I see that as a way to bring some intellectual property and new technology to the U.S. to create jobs and create new business opportunities for local businesses and contractors.
So contractors should welcome this
initiative.
Yes,
because it will welcome new products and services that they do not have at the moment.
What are some of the major, shall we say, challenges that often confront a foreign company that's trying to do business in the United States? What's your thought on that?
Well, not only in the United States, but of course with the U.S. government, the challenges overseas businesses face is the same ones U.S. businesses face with dealing with the government. It's a huge operation. The decisions are not made at the top, they're made at the contractor level, and so what is needed by them is to understand that this is a long process, that they have to have credible access, and it will take quite a bit of time and effort to get into the system.
Yeah, this question is just going to call for your personal opinion, because I recognize that you don't speak for the government, but fundamentally, does the U.S. government welcome foreign companies into this market? Is it something that they're looking forward to?
Of course, yeah, because as I mentioned earlier, a lot of innovation and technology is created overseas. You've got great contractors like British Aerospace and the like that have technologies that could be integrated into our government purchasing and thus be utilized all over the world. Plus, the U.S. government does purchase material and services for our bases and our operations overseas. So there is an absolute need for local procurement.
Yeah, it's a big market. Michael, you mentioned teaming, and of course, a lot of our audience watch our show each week because they're interested in how to win government contracts or how to increase their market share. Sometimes it's primes looking for subs, subs looking for primes. So let's think about the World Trade Center. How do you think it would help our members of our audience to essentially increase their sales and increase their profitability and increase their involvement with the U.S. government?
Well, as I said, we are affiliated and networked with over 300 trade centers around the world, also the 400 technology parks. What we intend to do at the World Trade Center Dulles is to perform or introduce in the future, a concierge type of service.
Okay, what is that? Why don't you explain that?
Well, that would be a two-way type of operation where companies overseas that have a technology they think that might sell in the U.S. can contact us, and we can look for potential partners or markets for that. And the reverse, there may be companies here that are looking for particular technology that might solve a problem they are not able to solve right now, and we would question the trade centers overseas, the science parks, to see if some of their member companies have the answer.
So you can reach out to a broad network of different entities, companies, people, to help U.S. contractors, U.S. government contractors, actually, grab additional market share.
Absolutely, that's what it's all about.
That's all about. Anybody who reads the paper or watches the television news for the last several months knows that the government has been really in a disarray. There's been sequestration and budget cliffs and continuing resolutions and government shutdowns, to the point that many government contractors are rethinking whether they should even be involved in this market. So given that, why are foreign companies interested in doing business here in the United States?
Well, the United States is still a very dynamic market, and I should also emphasize that the U.S. government is still, no matter what happens with the glitches and all that, it's still the largest customer in the world, so it will be a continuing attraction to foreign businesses.
Okay, so then if foreign businesses are attracted to working with the U.S. government, what are some of the keys that they must, to success, if you will?
Okay. Once they identify their product or service, they should do a considerable amount of work researching the market. They just cannot believe in their product and assume that there's a market for it. Secondly, once they've done that, they should spend a lot of effort finding a partner here in the U.S. that already knows the market and distribution system. And thirdly, I would say to be very, very patient.
Patience.
Yes.
Whether you are interested in partnering with international companies who are looking to expand into the U.S. market, or you'd like to explore how you can grow your business internationally, I hope that today's program gave you some valuable insights. Now, we covered a lot of ground today, both literally and figuratively. But if you only remember three things from Wanro, Robert, and Michael, it is to identify your market, find the appropriate partner, and be patient. Now, I'd like to thank Robert Cunningham, Business Development from the New Zealand Embassy, Wanro Lee, CEO of JG Business Link International, and Michael Rundy, President of World Trade Center Dulles Airport. Most importantly, though, I'd like to thank you, our viewers, for once again making Government Contracting Weekly a regular part of your learning regimen. For all of us at Key Solutions, I'm Jim McCarthy. See you next time.
You've been watching Government Contracting Weekly, sponsored each week by AOC Key Solutions Incorporated. Government Contracting Weekly is the only television program devoted exclusively to the competitive and dynamic world of government contracting. For additional information, comments, questions, or suggestions, please write us at governmentcontractingweekly.com.